Daniel Brooks slammed his employee badge down on the CEO's desk so hard the nameplate jumped. Not on the locker shelf. Not quietly in some back hallway. On the man's own desk. In his own office. In front of his own assistant. Adrian Whitmore leaned back in his chair and smiled the slow, satisfied smile of a man who had just won something. He had no idea he had just lost everything. Because what happened inside Hargrove Manufacturing over the next 7 days would not just end a career. It would expose the kind of cruelty that hides behind a company dress code and prove that the one man they publicly humiliated was the only reason the whole operation hadn't collapsed years ago. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far a story about one father's dignity can travel. And if you believe respect is earned, not demanded, hit subscribe. Every story on this channel is built for people who still believe that. The morning. Daniel Brooks walked into Hargrove Manufacturing for what would turn out to be the last ordinary day of his working life. He brought 2 things. He always brought a thermos of black coffee and a photograph. The photograph lived in his locker, had lived there for 4 years. It was a 5x7 print of his daughter Ava, at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning, sitting on a carousel horse at the Cuyahoga County Fair, with her arms stretched wide like she was trying to hug the whole world at once. Daniel had taken that photo on the last truly carefree day he could remember 3 weeks before his wife Marie went to the doctor for what everyone assumed was an ordinary checkup. 3 weeks before everything changed. He kept that photo in his locker because it was the first thing he saw when he arrived before sunrise, and the last thing he saw before he went home. Some men kept motivational quotes taped to their lockers. Some kept magazine pictures or lucky coins or prayer cards. Daniel kept his daughter's face because on the days when the factory noise pressed in too hard and the exhaustion settled deep into his back and his hands and the place behind his eyes where headaches lived on those days, he needed to see her smile. He needed to be reminded why he was there. I was 35 years old, and he was tired in the particular way that single fathers who love their children deeply are always tired, not defeated, not broken, but worn at the edges, the way good leather gets worn. Useful tired. Purposeful tired. The kind of tired that still gets up at 4:45 in the morning because a little girl needs her breakfast hot, and her backpack checked, and her braid done before the school bus comes. Ava was 9 now. She had her mother's eyes dark brown, almost black, the kind that seemed to catch light from places no one else noticed. She had Daniel's stubbornness and his patience, and God help him, his habit of going completely silent when she was hurt instead of crying. That silence broke his heart every time. He knew exactly where she'd learned it. He pulled into the Hargrove parking lot at 5:22 that Tuesday morning in November. The Ohio sky was still dark, and his breath came out in small clouds as he walked from his truck to the employee entrance. The security guard, a retired postal worker named Ron Sellers, was eating a breakfast sandwich at his desk and raised a hand without looking up. "Morning, Daniel." "Morning, Ron. Cold one." "Supposed to get worse. Weatherman says possible flurries by afternoon." "Always the way," Daniel said and badged through the door. "I knew this building. The way you know a house you've lived in for a long time, not just the layout, but the personality of it. The way the heating system groaned on cold mornings before it found its rhythm. The slight vibration in the northeast corner of the production floor that indicated Line 4's primary conveyor belt was due for a tension adjustment. The smell of the break room coffee, which was always too strong, because the overnight crew made a full pot at midnight and left it burning until morning. He changed into his work clothes in the locker room, dark navy pants, gray Hargrove Manufacturing shirt with his name on the left chest, steel-toed boots he'd worn long enough that the leather had shaped itself to his feet. He looked at Ava's photograph for a moment, the way he always did, and then he closed the locker and went to work. For the first 4 hours of that shift, nothing happened that hadn't happened 100 times before. He walked his usual pre-shift inspection of lines 2, 3, and 4, his assigned area checking fluid levels, listening to the rhythm of the machines, the way a doctor listens to a chest, looking for anything that sounded different or felt wrong. He found a minor seal issue on the hydraulic press at Line 3's second station and fixed it before it became a problem. He logged it in the maintenance book and made a note for the afternoon crew. By 7:30, production was running at full capacity. Workers were moving with the efficient, unconscious coordination of a team that had been doing this together for years. Daniel moved between stations, not because it was required, but because it was his nature. He spotted a new hire named Marcus on line 2, struggling with the stacking sequence, and walked over without being asked. "Here," he said, positioning his hands over Marcus's. "You're fighting the machine. Don't fight it. Let the belt bring it to you, then redirect. See, feel the difference." Marcus, 23 years old, and 3 weeks into the job, exhaled with relief. "I kept thinking I was doing it wrong." "You were. Now you're not." Daniel gave him a nod. "Ask me if you hit another wall. That's what I'm here for." He moved on. This was Daniel Brooks, in his natural environment, not performing, not seeking recognition, just being the person he had always been. The man who fixed things. The man who showed up. 12 years at Hargrove Manufacturing had shaped him into the kind of worker that every floor manager dreams about and every bean counter forgets to value until he's gone. He had been there long enough to remember when the company was run by its founder, Gerald Hargrove, a man who had started the business in his garage in 1987 and spent 30 years building it into a regional manufacturing powerhouse. Gerald Hargrove was not a soft man. He was demanding and direct and expected full commitment from everyone who worked for him. But he also knew every employee by name. He knew their families. He showed up on the floor during the overnight shift, sometimes just to shake hands and ask how people were doing. Daniel had respected Gerald Hargrove. Gerald had retired 18 months ago, and when he did, he handed the company to Adrian Whitmore. Adrian Whitmore was 41 years old, had an MBA from Northwestern, and had spent 15 years as a turnaround specialist. A man companies hired when they wanted to cut costs aggressively and increase short-term profit margins without asking too many questions about the human cost. He had done this successfully at 3 other companies. He arrived at Hargrove with a reputation, a firm handshake, and an absolute certainty that manufacturing operations ran on discipline and that discipline required fear. The first time Daniel saw him, Adrian was standing in the middle of the production floor in a suit that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly mortgage payment, looking around the operation with the particular expression of a man who sees not workers, but inefficiencies. The first changes were small. Mandatory overtime with 48-hour notice reduced to 24. Break times audited. Production quotas increased by 12% without a corresponding adjustment in staffing. Nothing catastrophic on its own. Everything uncomfortable in aggregate. Then the conversations started happening. Workers who raised concerns were told they lacked the vision to understand necessary growth. Senior employees who pushed back were quietly reassigned to less favorable shifts. The culture of openness that Gerald Hargrove had spent decades building began to erode with a speed that was almost impressive. Within 6 months of Adrian's arrival, 3 of Hargrove's most experienced floor supervisors had resigned. Daniel stayed. He stayed because he had a daughter to feed, yes, but also because he believed, perhaps stubbornly, perhaps naively, that good work was its own argument. That a man who showed up every day, did excellent work, and treated his colleagues with respect couldn't be ignored forever. He believed that eventually the right people would notice the right things. He was about to learn how badly he had miscalculated. His phone vibrated in his pocket at 9:14 that morning. On the production floor, personal phones were permitted for emergencies, only kept on silent. Daniel reached for his automatically when he felt the buzz, glanced at the screen, and felt his chest drop. Ridgewood Elementary School. He answered before it finished the first ring. "Mr. Brooks." The voice on the other end was calm in the way that school administrators train themselves to be calm, deliberately, carefully, the way you hold something fragile. "This is Patricia Owens, the school nurse. Please don't be alarmed, but Ava has had a reaction to something. We believe it may be related to the new medication her pediatrician prescribed last week. She's alert, and she's talking, but she's showing significant signs of distress, and her blood pressure is elevated enough that I want her seen by a physician as soon as possible." Daniel was already moving. "How bad?" he said low and even. She's okay right now. But I wouldn't wait, Mr. Brooks. I think she needs to be evaluated today. We've been unable to reach her listed emergency contact. That's my mother. She lives in Akron. She might not have her phone. Yes, sir, I understand. That's why I'm calling you directly. I'm on my way, he said. 20 minutes. He ended the call and walked directly to his supervisor, a 20-year Hargrove veteran named Carl Hutchins, who was reviewing production logs at his station near the northwest wall. Carl. Daniel kept his voice level. My daughter's school just called. She's having a medical reaction. She needs to be seen by a doctor. I've arranged for Marcus to cover my hydraulic check on line 3, and everything else is running clean. I need to leave. Carl looked at him. Carl knew Daniel, had known him for a decade. He had no hesitation whatsoever. Go, he said. I'll log it as a family medical emergency. Be with your daughter. Thank you. Daniel shook the man's hand, actually shook it, which Carl would remember later. I'll call when I know something. He was halfway to the locker room when he heard the voice. Where exactly do you think you're going? Adrian Whitmore had come onto the production floor unannounced, which was becoming a habit to observe the morning shift. He had seen Daniel moving with unusual purpose toward the exit corridor. He had seen the body language of a man leaving, and he had followed. Daniel turned around. Adrian was standing in the center aisle of the production floor, hands folded behind his back, dressed in his standard uniform of gray suit and red tie, and an expression that seemed permanently adjusted to mild contempt. Around them, the machines were running. Workers were working. But heads were turning. Eyes were moving. The floor had begun to sense something was happening. My daughter is sick, Daniel said. I spoke with my supervisor. I've arranged coverage for my stations. I'm following emergency protocol, which is in the employee handbook on page 37. I don't care what page it's on, Adrian said. He said it the way you'd correct a child. You are on my floor during production hours, and you have not spoken with me. With respect, Daniel said, and those two words carried about as much warmth as the November air outside. My direct supervisor is Carl Hutchins. I've notified him. Emergency leave protocol does not require executive approval. Something shifted in Adrian's face. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something colder, the particular irritation of a man who cannot stand the experience of being publicly correct. The production floor was quiet now. Not silent, but quiet in the way that happens when human beings collectively sense that something important is about to happen, and instinctively reduce their own noise to hear it better. Let me explain something to you, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a register that was meant to be heard by the two of them and by everyone around them simultaneously. It was a practice tone, a performance. This factory runs because people follow a chain of command. And that chain of command runs through me. Not through Carl. Not through the employee handbook. Through me. Daniel looked at him for a moment. My daughter is 9 years old, he said. She's in a school nurse's office with elevated blood pressure and a medication reaction. I have followed every protocol. My supervisor approved my leave. I have arranged coverage for my stations. There is nothing else required of me. What is required of you? Adrian said, taking one step forward, his voice rising just slightly, just enough so that it would carry just enough so that every worker within 50 feet could hear every word, is that you do not walk off this floor without my authorization. What is required of you is that you understand that your personal life does not override the operational needs of this facility. What is required of you, Daniel, is obedience. He paused. He let the word hang there. Then he finished it. Obey me or leave. Those are your options. Pick one. The words dropped into the silence of the factory floor like stones into still water. No one moved. Marcus, the young hire, Daniel had helped 20 minutes ago, stood at his station with his hands frozen above the belt. Carl Hutchins, 40 feet away, had gone completely still. 3 women from line 4, who had stopped to watch, had expressions on their faces that ranged from disbelief to fury to something approaching grief. Daniel stood in the center of all of it. He was 35 years old, and he had worked at this factory for 12 years, and in those 12 years he had given this company everything. His mornings, his weekends, his back and his hands and his expertise. He had trained their workers and saved their equipment and protected their contracts and never once, not once, asked for recognition he wasn't given. He had worked through back pain he didn't mention to anyone. He had come in on Christmas Eve because a machine had failed and no one else knew how to fix it. He had trained 3 employees who had been promoted above him. He had stayed loyal through a management transition that had driven away better compensated people than him because he believed that loyalty built on nothing but principle was the most unbreakable kind. And now a man in a red tie was telling him to choose between his job and his daughter. He looked at Adrian Whitmore for a long moment, not with anger, not with desperation, with a clarity that was almost unsettling in its quietness. And then Daniel Brooks did something no one on that floor expected. He nodded. Just once. A small definitive nod, like a man who has made a calculation and arrived at a conclusion he is completely at peace with. Then he turned and walked to his locker. He opened it. He took out Ava's photograph, the 5x7 of his daughter, with her arms spread wide on the carousel horse, grinning her gap-toothed grin. He tucked it carefully into the inside pocket of his jacket. He took out his lunch container. He folded his work jacket, the Hargrove Manufacturing jacket, with his name on the chest, and laid it neatly on the top shelf of the locker. He reached up and unclipped his employee badge, held it for 1 second, and placed it on the shelf beside the jacket. He closed the locker. He picked up his thermos. He walked past Adrian Whitmore without looking at him. He walked past Marcus, and he saw the young man's eyes wide and wet in a way that 23-year-old men work very hard to hide, and Daniel gave him a single nod that said everything he didn't have time to say out loud. He walked past Carl Hutchins, who had moved to stand near the corridor, and Carl reached out and gripped his arm for just a second. "Daniel," he said. Low, rough. "Take care of them," Daniel said. He meant the workers. Carl knew it. He walked to the exit. He pushed through the door, and the cold November air hit him in the face, and he breathed it in, and he kept walking. Behind him, the factory was completely silent. Adrian Whitmore stood in the middle of the production floor and waited for someone to start working again. Waited for the moment to pass. Waited for the normal order of things to reassert itself the way it always had before, because in every factory he'd ever run. This was the part where the lesson landed and everyone returned to their stations and understood that authority was absolute. But no one moved. They just looked at the door Daniel had walked through, and Adrian understood for the first time since he'd arrived at Hargrove Manufacturing that he had made a mistake. He just didn't know how large it was yet. Daniel was 17 minutes from Ridgewood Elementary. He drove in the focused, deliberate way that men drive when they are not panicking precisely because they cannot afford to panic, hands at 10 and 2. Eyes moving, mind running through everything at once. He called the school nurse back and told her he was on his way. He called his mother in Akron and left a voicemail. He called his neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who had been his unofficial emergency contact for 3 years, and she answered on the second ring and told him she could be at the hospital within the hour if needed. He did not call the factory. When he walked into Ridgewood Elementary's nurse's office, Ava was lying on the cot with a damp cloth across her forehead, and the particular expression she wore when she was trying very hard not to seem scared. She was pale under her brown skin, and when she saw him come through the door, she didn't say his name. She just exhaled, long and shaking, like she'd been holding her breath since the moment she felt sick. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the cot and put his hand on her face. Her skin was warm and damp. "Hey, baby," he said. "Hey, Daddy." Her voice was small. "How you feeling?" "Weird. My heart was going fast." "Yeah. Like when I run too hard, but I wasn't running." "I know." He smoothed her hair back. "We're going to go get you checked out, okay? Doctor's going to take a look at you and tell us what's going on." She looked at him with those dark eyes, Marie's eyes, and said, "Did you leave work?" "I did." "Were they mad?" Daniel looked at his daughter. He thought about Adrian Whitmore and his red tie and his 4 words and the locker and the photograph and the door. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Daddy." "It really doesn't, Ava. The only thing that matters right now is you." She held his hand the way she hadn't since she was maybe 6. Her small fingers wrapped around two of his tight like an anchor. He felt it all the way up his arm and into his chest. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Of course I came," he said. "I will always come." They spent 4 hours at the pediatric urgent care facility. The physician, a compact woman named Dr. Reyes, who had the calm efficiency of someone who had seen everything twice, determined that the reaction was a documented but uncommon response to the new antihistamine Ava's pediatrician had prescribed the previous week. It was not life-threatening, but had been frightening tachycardia, lightheadedness, elevated blood pressure, and would require medication adjustment and a follow-up within 48 hours. "She's fine," Dr. Reyes told Daniel in the hallway while Ava rested. "This kind of reaction resolves once the medication clears her system, usually 12 to 24 hours. But you were right to bring her in today, not tonight. These things are manageable when addressed early." What would have happened if she'd stayed at school? Dr. Reyes considered that for a moment, with the particular honesty that good doctors develop. "Probably still fine, possibly worse. The tachycardia was significant enough that I'm glad someone didn't try to wait it out." She paused. "You work nearby?" "About 20 minutes. You dropped what you were doing to get here?" "Yes." She nodded the way doctors nod when they're confirming something they already knew. "Good call, Dad." She went back to her other patients, and Daniel went back to his daughter. He sat in the chair beside Ava's bed while she dosed the medication and the fright of the morning pulling her into a light sleep. He kept his hand over hers. He looked at her face, peaceful now, just tired, and he felt the particular combination of gratitude and fury and sorrow that only a single parent can fully understand. Grateful that she was safe. Furious at the universe for making him the only person standing between her and everything that could go wrong. Sorrowful in the quiet way of a man who misses his wife most acutely in moments like this, when he wants more than anything to look across a hospital room and see another face that loves this child as much as he does. Marie had been gone for 4 years. 4 years since a Tuesday afternoon had turned his life into a before and an after. He didn't let himself go to that place often. He had learned in the way that grief teaches you whether you want to learn or not, that dwelling in the loss didn't help Ava. What helped Ava was her father being present and steady and warm, and that was what he worked to give her every day. But sitting in that chair, in the fluorescent quiet of the urgent care center, with his daughter's hand in his, and nothing but time to think, he let himself feel it. All of it. The 12 years. The early mornings. The equipment manuals he read on lunch breaks to understand machines well enough to save the company money they never thanked him for saving. The Christmas Eve. The back pain. The 3 promotions that went to men who had been at Hargrove a quarter of the time he had. The way Adrian Whitmore had said, "Obey me," on a factory floor in front of 200 people, as if 12 years of loyalty and expertise reduced to a single test of submission. He thought about all of it. And he thought about the choice he had made. He felt something then that he hadn't expected to feel certainty. Clean and settled the way water is clear at depth. He had made the right choice. Not because Hargrove Manufacturing didn't matter. It had mattered enormously for a long time, but because some choices reveal themselves in the moment you make them. The moment he placed his badge on that locker shelf, the moment he walked through that door, he knew. A man who cannot protect his daughter is not a man who has kept his most important promise. And he had made that promise at Marie's grave on a cold February morning 4 years ago, standing with a 5-year-old girl who didn't fully understand what any of it meant, yet promising quietly that she would never face the worst of life alone. That whatever happened, her father would come. He had come. Back at the factory, the morning had fractured. It began with stillness, that post-Daniel stillness that nobody quite knew what to do with, and then it broke open into something more complicated. Adrian had returned to his office. He had instructed the floor supervisors to get production back on schedule. They had done so with the particular efficiency of people who are doing their jobs and nothing else performing compliance, while the rest of their minds were somewhere entirely different. And the conversations started. In the break room. In the locker room. In the quick exchanges between line 4 and line 2, when the overhead noise created enough cover for two people to talk without being heard. He's been here 12 years. 12 years, I know, since before the expansion. Did you see his face when he walked out? He wasn't angry. He was just done. His daughter's 9 years old. She was sick. He told Adrian that. We all heard it. He told him he'd covered his stations, that he'd cleared it with Carl, that it was all by the book. Adrian didn't care. Adrian never cares. You remember last spring, Randolph's wife had surgery, and he asked for a half day. Adrian made him use personal leave and then had someone audit his productivity records. I remember. Daniel fixed the Series 7 last year by himself, 3 days before the consolidated energy delivery. If that line had gone down, we'd have lost the contract. He doesn't know that. He wasn't here yet. He knows. I reported it directly to Whitmore's predecessor. It's in the files. So he knows, and he still said what he said. The conversation stopped there because it didn't need to go further. What more could be said? They all knew what they knew. They had all watched the same thing happen on the same production floor that morning, and what they had witnessed wasn't just a manager enforcing authority. What they had witnessed was a test, and the wrong man had failed it. Carl Hutchins spent his lunch break writing the most detailed incident report he'd filed in 20 years. He recorded everything, the time, the exact conversation, Daniel's specific compliance with emergency protocol, the fact that coverage for Daniel's stations had been arranged before he left, the fact that Adrian Whitmore's intervention had been unprovoked and procedurally baseless. He filed it with Human Resources at 12:47. He also sent a copy to the executive assistant of the board's chairman, a man named Raymond Cho, with whom Carl had worked during the Hargrove expansion in 2018. He did it because he was a 20-year employee who believed in doing things the right way. He also did it because Daniel Brooks deserved to have someone fighting for him, even if Daniel himself was too busy holding his daughter's hand to fight for himself. The calls started coming into HR that afternoon. Not complaints exactly. Nobody wanted to be first to formally complain. The fear Adrian had spent 18 months cultivating had done its work. But inquiries. Questions framed carefully in the language of due process and company policy. I want to understand the process for emergency family leave, said one. I'm reviewing my employment contract, and I have a question about supervisor authorization for medical emergencies, said another. I'd like to know if there's a mechanism for reporting management conduct that appears inconsistent with company policy, said a third. HR had received 8 of these inquiries by the end of the day. Marcus, the 23-year-old from line 2, stayed late and typed a statement on his phone, unsolicited, unprompted, describing exactly what he had witnessed that morning, including Daniel's help 30 minutes before the confrontation. He emailed it to HR with the subject line, Witness Statement, November 14th Incident. He'd never written a formal witness statement in his life. Something about watching Daniel Brooks walk out of that factory had made him feel for the first time that the way things were did not have to be the way things stayed. Ava slept most of the afternoon. Daniel sat beside her, and when she woke, they watched an old animated movie on his phone, sharing a pair of earbuds. Ava's head resting against his arm. They didn't talk about what had happened. They didn't need to. She was 9, and she understood exactly as much as a 9-year-old needed to understand her father had come. That was enough. That was everything. At 4:30, she looked up at him and said, "Daddy, are you going to be okay?" He looked down at her. "Why do you ask?" "Because you have that face." "What face?" "The one you have when something happened that you're not telling me about." She was serious and matter-of-fact about it, the way children sometimes are when they are observing their parents with more accuracy than their parents give them credit for. "You don't have to tell me what it is. I just want to know if you're okay." Daniel looked at his daughter for a long moment. She had his stubbornness, his silence, his patience. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's way of seeing through things. "Yeah, baby," he said. "I'm going to be okay." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She studied him for another second with those dark eyes, and then she settled back against his arm, apparently satisfied. "Good," she said. Because I need you to be okay. I know. Like pretty much always. I know, Ava. Just checking. He put his arm around her and held her. Outside the window of the urgent care center, the sky had gone dark, the way Ohio skies go dark in November, fast and final, like a door closing. The first thin flakes of snow were beginning to fall, just as Ron Sellers had predicted that morning when Daniel had badged into a building he didn't know would be the last time. He drove Ava home through the snow. He made her soup because it was the easiest and warmest thing he could make quickly, and they ate it together at the kitchen table. And she told him about a project she had due next week, about state capitals, that she hadn't started yet. And he told her they would work on it this weekend, and she said, all of them. And he said, all 50. And she made a face that was 90% theatrics and 10% genuine dismay, which was the face she always made when she knew he was right, but wasn't ready to admit it. He got her into bed by 8. He stood in the doorway of her room for a moment, watching the way the nightlight caught the planes of her sleeping face, and he felt it again, that deep, clean certainty. Then he went to the kitchen table. He opened his laptop, and he started rewriting his resume. I wasn't angry. That was the thing that would strike people later when they tried to understand what had happened. They expected him to be furious, to vent to rage, apply for jobs out of spite, to spend the night composing hostile emails to HR or Adrian Whitmore or the Ohio Department of Labor. But he wasn't angry. He was clear. There is a particular kind of clarity that comes when you have been pushed to a decision you should have made earlier, and the universe does you the service of making it impossible to delay any longer. You feel it in your sternum, settled and warm, like the moment a fever breaks. Daniel felt it now. He had given Hargrove Manufacturing 12 years and enormous amounts of himself. He had received a job and a paycheck and the daily satisfaction of doing work he was genuinely good at. For a long time, that had been enough. It was no longer enough. Not because of Adrian Whitmore, a man he had dismissed from his consideration the moment he walked through the factory door into the November cold. Adrian Whitmore was not worth the energy it would take to resent him. It was no longer enough because Daniel was 35 years old and his daughter was 9, and the years were moving at a speed that was difficult to look at directly, and he had been making himself smaller than he was for long enough that he had almost forgotten the shape he was supposed to be. He worked on his resume until 11:30. It was a good resume. He had not fully understood until he began writing it down exactly how much he knew and had done and could do. 12 years of manufacturing experience. Equipment maintenance expertise across 6 industrial systems. A record of cost savings that numbered in the hundreds of thousands of dollars if you counted all of it and put it on paper. He had never put it on paper before. He sent it to 3 contacts he trusted. Former colleagues who had moved to other companies with a note that said simply, "Looking for new opportunities. I'd appreciate any leads. Thank you." Then he closed the laptop. He looked out the kitchen window at the snow which was coming down steadily now, covering the yard, covering the street, covering everything in the particular forgiveness that snow provides when it settles over the evidence of the day. He thought about Marie. He thought about Ava's face when he walked into the nurse's office. He thought about the photograph in the carousel, the gap-toothed grin, the arms spread wide. He thought about a promise. I will always come. He had. And whatever came next, whatever new uncertainty or difficulty or recalibration the next week brought, he would face it the same way he'd faced every hard thing since the worst Tuesday afternoon of his life. One morning at a time, one daughter at a time, one right choice at a time. He turned off the kitchen light. I went to check on Ava one more time, still sleeping, still breathing, still utterly unaware of how completely she had reoriented the axis of her father's world. And then he went to bed. He slept better than he had in months. The factory 17 miles away was running night shift, and in the morning it would begin to understand what it had lost. The snow was still on the ground Wednesday morning when Carl Hutchins arrived at the factory 40 minutes before his shift started. I didn't have to come in early. Nobody asked him to. But Carl was 61 years old and had been working factory floors since he was 19, and in all that time he had developed an instinct for when something was wrong, the way old sailors develop an instinct for weather. You felt it before you could name it. Something in the air pressure. Something in the silence. He sat in his truck in the parking lot and drank his coffee and watched the other cars pull in. He watched people he had known for years walk through the employee entrance with their heads down and their shoulders in, carrying themselves the way people carry themselves when they are bracing for something they cannot articulate. Daniel's space was empty. Of course it was empty. Daniel was gone. Carl knew that. He had processed the termination paperwork himself the afternoon before, at Adrian's explicit instruction, signed his name next to a box that said, "Voluntary Resignation," which was a lie so clean, it almost looked like the truth. He had signed it because he had no choice. And then he had gone home and sat at his kitchen table and stared at his hands for a while, feeling the particular shame of a man who did the wrong thing for understandable reasons. His wife, Beverly, had come in from the other room and looked at his face and said, "What happened?" "I did something today I'm not proud of." "What?" "I signed my name to something that wasn't true." Beverly had sat down across from him. She had been married to Carl for 34 years, and she knew the specific geography of his guilt. "Can you fix it?" "I already tried to start," he said, thinking of the incident report, thinking of the email to Raymond Cho's assistant. "I don't know if it's enough." "Is there more you can do?" Carl thought about it for a long moment. "Yeah," he said. "There's more I can do." That was why he was in the parking lot 40 minutes early, drinking cold coffee and building up what he needed to walk back into a building that felt today like a place he wasn't sure he recognized anymore. Inside, the morning played out the way mornings do when something has gone wrong, but the official version hasn't caught up yet. Everyone doing their jobs, hitting their marks, following their routines. While underneath it all, the actual conversation was happening in glances and silences, and the particular way people don't quite meet each other's eyes in the break room. Marcus was at line 2 when Carl came through. The young man had come in early too, which Carl noticed. He was running his pre-production check with an exactness that was almost aggressive, like he was trying to do everything perfectly, because doing everything perfectly was the only response he had available to what he'd witnessed yesterday. Carl stopped by his station. "How you doing this morning?" Marcus kept his hands moving on the equipment check. "Fine." "Marcus?" He stopped. He looked up. He was 23 years old, and trying very hard not to look like yesterday had hit him the way it had. "You sent that witness statement to HR." It wasn't a question. Marcus had told Carl before he left the previous evening. The kid had looked almost apologetic about it, like he wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do, like he needed someone older to tell him. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Good." Carl held his gaze. That was the right call, don't second-guess it. Something shifted in Marcus's face. Not quite relief, not quite confidence, but something moving in that direction. "You think it'll make a difference?" Carl considered lying. He considered the comfortable, protective lie that older men tell younger men when they want to spare them the weight of uncertainty. Then he decided Marcus had already seen too much dishonesty in the last 24 hours. "I don't know," he said, "but a man's name deserves to have the truth attached to it. Whatever else happens that matters." Marcus nodded, went back to his check. Carl walked to his supervisor's station and began his own morning routine. And the factory ran. Because factories run. Because the machines don't stop, because something human went wrong, and the orders don't hold themselves, and the belts don't pause in respect for the absence of one man who had spent 12 years making sure they kept moving. But everyone felt it. Every single person on that floor felt it. The way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. Not always, not constantly, but every time you turn a certain way, every time you reach for something that should be there and find the space where it used to be. At 9:15, Line 3's hydraulic press began making a sound. It was a small sound. A rhythm that was slightly off a frequency that didn't belong. The kind of thing that most people wouldn't catch until it became a bigger sound, and by then you were looking at 3 hours of downtime minimum and a production delay that would ripple through the afternoon schedule. The floor supervisor on Line 3 was a man named Pete Griggs. Pete was competent and experienced and had been at Hargrove for 7 years. He heard the sound identified that something was wrong and pulled out his maintenance log to determine the last service date on the hydraulic press. Then he looked around for Daniel. The reflex was so automatic, he didn't realize he'd done it until he was already looking at the empty space where Daniel would have been. He stood there for a full 3 seconds. Then he called the maintenance team. The maintenance team sent 2 men who spent 45 minutes diagnosing what Daniel would have identified in 4 minutes, because Daniel had fixed this exact problem on this exact machine 8 months ago and had written detailed notes in the maintenance log that nobody had read since. The repair took an hour and 20 minutes. Line 3 was down for that entire time. The afternoon schedule absorbed the impact, like a body absorbs a punch. It stayed upright, but everyone felt it. Pete filed the incident report. In the notes section, he wrote, "Delay due to hydraulic issue on Line 3 Station 2. Resolved by maintenance team." Note: this issue was previously addressed by D. Brooks in March. Refer to maintenance log entry 314 for detailed procedure that would have significantly reduced diagnosis time. He didn't write it to make a point. He wrote it because it was accurate. But it made a point anyway. By the end of the day, there were 3 such reports. A calibration issue on Line 2 that Marcus caught but couldn't fix without help. A scheduling conflict on the afternoon shift that Daniel had been managing informally for months, coordinating coverage between 2 workers whose schedules had a recurring gap that he had simply been filling himself without fanfare, without a title for it, because it needed to be done and he was there. And a customer inquiry routed to the floor that Daniel had been handling directly because he had the relationship and the knowledge to answer it, and without him, it sat in an inbox for 6 hours before anyone realized it existed. None of these things were catastrophic on their own. Together, they were a portrait. They were the picture of one man's value assembled in his absence, the way you sometimes only understand the architecture of a building when you take out one of its load-bearing walls. The difference was that buildings don't walk out under their own power. They don't make a choice. They don't have daughters. Daniel did, and while the factory was quietly cataloging everything it had lost, Daniel was at home with Ava, helping her with the state capitol's project at the kitchen table, testing her on flashcards he'd printed and cut himself, listening to her recite Juneau, Alaska, with the particular satisfaction of a child who has learned something she can now show off. "Okay," he said, flipping a card. "Wyoming. Cheyenne. Montana. Helena. Good. Idaho." She paused, bit her lip. "Boise. That's right. You had that one yesterday too." "I know. I wrote it on my hand so I'd remember." She held up her palm, sure enough in purple marker barely visible now. "Boise." Daniel looked at his daughter's hand and felt something open up in his chest that he didn't immediately have a word for. "Smart," he said. "Mom would have done the same thing." He looked at her. She said things like this sometimes casually, factually, as if her mother were simply in the other room, and he never knew whether it would hit him like a stone or like a hand on the shoulder. Today, it was somewhere in between. "Yeah," he said. "She would have. She used to write grocery lists on her arm." "She did. Drove me crazy. I kept telling her to use paper. And she kept not doing it." Stubbornly. Ava grinned that gap-toothed grin that was slightly smaller now because she was 9 and the permanent teeth were coming in, but still unmistakably hers. "I'm stubborn too. I've noticed. You are too." Also noticed. She picked up the next card herself, flipped it and held it toward him. "Quiz me." He took it. He read it. "Nevada. Carson City." She reached for another one. "Keep going. I want to do all 50. They did all 50. She got 47 right. He told her 47 out of 50 was excellent, and she told him she wanted 50 out of 50 by Friday, and he said that was ambitious, and she said she knew, and he said okay, then they'd work on it. He tucked her into bed at 8:30. He sat at the kitchen table afterward with a cup of coffee and his laptop and began doing what he had started the night before, with more focus and less uncertainty. He updated his resume. He drafted emails to former colleagues. He researched 3 companies in the greater Cleveland area that were hiring for roles in his range of expertise. He made a list of everything he needed to do in the next 2 weeks. His finances, his timeline, the practical geography of a transition he hadn't planned for, but that was happening anyway. I was methodical about it. Not because he felt nothing. He felt plenty, but because feeling it and drowning in it were two different things. And he had learned 4 years ago that the difference between them was whether you kept your hands busy and your mind aimed at the next necessary step. The next necessary step was a new job. He made himself go to bed at 11. He lay in the dark for a while, not sleeping, letting the day decompress. I thought about 12 years. The hours. The accumulated weight of all those mornings, all those machines, all those small disasters averted and workers supported and problems solved before they became problems. He didn't feel bitter about it exactly. You can't live bitter when you have a 9-year-old who needs you present and clear-headed. But he acknowledged it. He let it be real and significant the way it deserved to be before he let it go. Then he thought about Adrian Whitmore saying, "Obey me," and the silence that had followed, and he felt something he hadn't let himself feel fully until right now. Relief. Clean, clarifying, enormous relief. Because the truth that Daniel Brooks had not quite been ready to face before Tuesday morning was this: Hargrove Manufacturing had been slowly diminishing him for the better part of 18 months, and he had been allowing it. Not out of weakness, out of responsibility, out of the practical necessity of keeping the lights on, and the mortgage paid, and Ava's school supplies stocked, and the refrigerator full. Out of the loyalty that had always been one of his best qualities, and that Adrian Whitmore had spent a year and a half mistaking for submission. The ultimatum had freed him from a choice he hadn't known how to make for himself. He almost wanted to be grateful. Almost. He fell asleep before he could decide. At 6:45 the next morning, his phone rang. He reached for it in the half-dark, expecting the alarm, and saw instead a number he didn't recognize, a 266 area code, Cleveland, not a contact in his phone. He answered. "Daniel Brooks. Speaking. My name is Raymond Cho. I'm the chairman of the Hargrove Board of Directors. I apologize for calling this early. I was given your number by Carl Hutchins." A brief pause. "I'd like to talk with you if you're willing. Not today, I imagine you need some time, and I want to have something concrete to offer before I take up yours. But soon. Would the day after tomorrow work? I can come to you." Daniel was sitting up in bed now, fully awake, the way you get fully awake when the stakes become clear. He processed what he was hearing, the chairman of the board, coming to him. "What is it you want to talk about?" he asked. "What happened Tuesday morning?" Another pause, and this time, there was something in it that wasn't corporate courtesy, something that sounded like it had weight. "And what we should have known before Tuesday morning, which is a different conversation and a harder one." Daniel was quiet for a moment. He thought about the photograph in his jacket pocket, the carousel, the gap-toothed grin, the arms stretched wide. "Day after tomorrow," he said. 10 o'clock. I'll text you the address. Thank you, Mr. Brooks." "Mr. Cho," Daniel said, and his voice was even and clear and entirely without anger. "I need you to understand something before we meet. I didn't walk out of that factory because I was emotional. I walked out because I made a deliberate decision, and I will not be walking back into anything that asks me to be less than what I am." A silence. Then, "I understand. That's precisely why I'm calling." They hung up. Daniel sat in the quiet of his bedroom for a moment, his phone in his hand, the gray morning light coming through the curtains. Then he got up and went to make breakfast. Because Ava had school. Because the flashcards still had 3 wrong answers. Because no matter what Raymond Cho had to say today was Wednesday, and today required the same things. Wednesday always required hot breakfast, packed backpack, checked homework, proper braid. He had the eggs on before he heard her footsteps in the hallway. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, in her pajamas, hair, wild from sleep, squinting at him with the expression she wore every morning before she was fully awake, the one that somehow combined suspicion and affection in equal measure, and that he would have given anything to see on her face every morning for the rest of his life. "You're up early," she said. "I'm always up early." "You're up earlier than early. I got a phone call." She blinked. Processed. Good phone call or bad phone call? He looked at his daughter. Don't know yet, he said. Might be both. She climbed onto her stool at the kitchen counter and folded her arms on the surface and rested her chin on them, watching him cook with the patient, evaluating attention of a child who is waiting for more information but has decided not to push yet. Okay, she said. Okay, he agreed. He put a plate in front of her. She picked up her fork. They ate. Back at the factory, Raymond Cho was already on his second call of the morning. The first had been to Daniel. The second was to the head of HR, a woman named Linda Marsh, who had been at Hargrove for 9 years and who had spent the previous 24 hours staring at a growing stack of documents that told a story she had been afraid to tell anyone. Linda, Raymond said, talk to me. She talked. She walked him through the 8 procedural inquiries. Marcus's witness statement. Carl Hutchins's incident report. The maintenance logs from line 3. The production delays. The customer inquiry that had sat in an inbox for 6 hours. She walked him through the 3 other formal complaints that had been filed in the last 4 months by employees who had quietly left the company afterward. Complaints that had been reviewed internally and dismissed under Adrian Whitmore's direction. She walked him through something else too. Something she had found when she went back through the files the night before, looking for, she wasn't sure what. A performance review Daniel had been given 6 months ago filed by Adrian Whitmore, directly rating him as meets minimum expectations. Minimum. For a man whose file contained commendations going back 11 years. Raymond Cho listened to all of it without interrupting. When Linda was done, the silence on the line lasted long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Raymond, I'm here. His voice had the particular quality of a man who is making calculations and doesn't like the numbers. How many of those 8 procedural inquiries came in within 24 hours of the incident? All 8. How many employee complaints have we had in total over the past 18 months? She checked. 14 documented. I believe there are more that were never formally filed. And before that, before Whitmore's tenure, she checked. 3. Over the preceding 4 years. Another silence. Get me everything, Raymond said. Every document, every complaint, every maintenance log, every production report from the last 18 months. I want it on my desk by end of day. Already pulling it together. Good. Then, Linda. The performance review Whitmore filed on Brooks. The one that said minimum expectations. Yes. In your professional assessment, and I want your actual assessment, not the version you think I want to hear. Does that review reflect the documentation in his file? Linda Marsh had been in human resources for 22 years. She had filed accurate documents and inaccurate ones. She had protected companies from liability, and she had protected employees from injustice, and she had sometimes failed at both, and she knew the difference between a file that reflected a person's actual performance and a file that reflected someone's desire to manage a narrative. No, she said, it does not. That's what I thought. A pause. Thank you, Linda. Keep your phone on. He hung up. He sat for a moment in his home office, which looked out over a yard still covered in Wednesday's snow, the same snow that covered Daniel's yard, 17 miles away, where a 9-year-old was finishing her breakfast and a man was washing dishes and thinking about a phone call. Raymond Cho had built a career on the ability to walk into a complex situation and understand it quickly. He had sat on 6 corporate boards. He had navigated 3 company crises that could have gone badly and went well because someone had been paying attention. He was 71 years old, and he did not like the feeling he had right now. It was the feeling of having been asleep. Not deliberately asleep, not negligently asleep exactly, but absent in the way that board members can become absent when they are trusting the people they've put in charge to make the right decisions. He had hired Adrian Whitmore based on a track record and strong recommendations and a set of metrics that had looked very good on paper. He had trusted the numbers. He had not been watching the people. He picked up his phone and made a 3rd call. This one was to Adrian Whitmore. Adrian answered on the 2nd ring, his voice carrying the particular confidence of a man who does not yet know the conversation has changed. Raymond, good morning. Adrian, I need you in the boardroom at 2 o'clock. Board members Chen and Okafor will be joining us remotely. A brief pause. Is there an agenda you can share? Yes. The agenda is Tuesday morning's incident involving Daniel Brooks, the HR documentation from the last 18 months, and the production impact reports from the last 48 hours. Another pause, this one from Raymond's side, deliberate. I'd suggest you bring anything you'd like the board to consider as context. The silence from Adrian's end lasted just a half-second too long. Of course, he said. I'll be there. Raymond hung up. He thought about Adrian Whitmore and what he'd built, or more accurately what he'd dismantled at Hargrove over 18 months. Thought about 14 complaints. Thought about 3 supervisors who had resigned. Thought about a performance review that didn't match 11 years of commendations. Thought about a man being told on a factory floor in front of 200 people to obey or leave when the man had already done everything right. I thought about what Carl Hutchins had written in his email, a single sentence outside the formal language of the incident report, added at the end, like an afterthought, that was actually the point. He walked out without anger and without apology, and every single person on this floor watched him do it, and nobody started working again for 3 full minutes. I've been on factory floors for 20 years. I have never seen that happen. I think you should understand what that means. Raymond understood what it meant. He'd understood it the moment he read it. It meant you didn't just lose an employee. You lost the thing that employees see when they need to believe that dignity is still possible in a place that asks a lot of them. You lost the living argument that a man could work hard and be good and be respected. When that argument walked out the door, everything else started to follow. He had seen it happen before. He hoped he was calling Daniel soon enough to stop it from finishing. The 2 o'clock meeting was not comfortable. Adrian arrived with a legal pad and the kind of prepared composure that men develop when they are accustomed to controlling rooms. He presented his position clearly. Daniel Brooks had left his station without executive authorization, which was insubordination, which required correction. The corrective measure he had applied was consistent with his management philosophy of clear accountability. The production issues that followed were normal adjustment, not evidence of systemic dependence on one employee. Board member Angela Chen, who had joined remotely from Chicago and had spent 30 years in operations management before moving to advisory work, listened to this presentation in silence. Then she said, "Adrian, walk me through the moment you made the decision to intervene." "I observed an employee leaving the production floor during shift hours." "You didn't know why he was leaving." "I knew he hadn't cleared it with me, but he had cleared it with his direct supervisor who had approved the leave under emergency protocol. Is that correct?" A beat. "Carl Hutchins is a floor supervisor. I'm the CEO." "That's not what I asked. I asked if Daniel Brooks had followed procedure." Another beat, shorter. "He had followed the protocol as written, yes. However." "Thank you." Angela made a note. "And when he explained that his daughter was ill, what was your response?" The room held the question. Adrian said, "The operational needs of the facility." "Adrian." Raymond's voice was quiet and very even. "What was your response to being told that a 9-year-old girl was sick and her father needed to go to her?" This time the silence was long enough to become its own kind of answer. Board member James Okafor, joining from Atlanta, had been quiet through the entire presentation. He was 63 and had spent his career in labor relations, and he had the ability to be completely still in a way that was easy to mistake for passivity right up until the moment he spoke. "I've reviewed the employee file," he said. "The one Linda Marsh compiled, not the performance review from 6 months ago, the full file going back 12 years. He paused. "Can you tell me, Adrian, what in your professional assessment was the basis for a minimum expectations rating on a man with 11 years of prior commendations?" Adrian straightened slightly. "My assessment was based on my direct observation of performance under my tenure." "Over how many months?" 18. "During which you made significant changes to production quotas, management structure, and workplace culture that resulted in the resignation of 3 experienced floor supervisors and 14 documented employee complaints. Does that context factor into your observation of performance?" "The changes I made were necessary for efficiency. The quarterly numbers are up, James said. That's true. They were up at your last two companies as well for the first 18 months. I looked. What happened at month 24 at those companies is where it gets interesting. He let that sit for a moment. I'm not asking rhetorically, Adrian. I genuinely want to understand your thinking. What followed was another hour of conversation that Raymond Cho would later describe to his wife as one of the most uncomfortable and necessary things he'd presided over in 30 years of board work. Not because Adrian was dishonest exactly, he was more defended than dishonest, more committed to his own framework than malicious, but because every question that got asked revealed something that should have been caught and hadn't been. At 4:15, Raymond called a brief recess. He stepped into the hallway and called Carl Hutchins. Carl answered on the first ring, which told Raymond he had been waiting. Carl, I need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. In your 20 years at Hargrove, have you ever seen a situation where one person's departure created the kind of impact this one has in 48 hours? Carl was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means someone is measuring their words because the words matter. Gerald Hargrove would know the answer better than me, he said. He built this place. But in my 20 years on the floor, not like this. A pause. Daniel wasn't just good at his job, Mr. Cho. He was the reason a lot of other people were good at their jobs. He trained them. He covered for them. He fixed things before anyone else knew they were broken. You don't see that when it's happening because it just looks like everything running smooth. You only see it when it stops. What's the floor like right now? Carl thought about how to answer that. People are doing their jobs, he said. But it's different. It's the kind of doing your job where everyone's watching to see what happens next. And until something happens, nobody's going to put in more than exactly what's required. You understand what I mean? Raymond understood exactly what he meant. One more question, he said. And I want your honest answer, not what you think I need to hear. All right. Do you think Daniel would come back? If we made it right, genuinely right, not just a raise and an apology. Carl took his time. Raymond waited. I think, Carl said slowly, that Daniel Brooks is a man who has never done anything for show in his life. He left because he had to. He's not sitting at home enjoying proving a point. He cares about this place, or he did for a long time. A pause. But he's also the kind of man who means it when he's done. So whatever you say to him, Mr. Cho, you better mean it too. Because if you go to him and you're not serious, he will know. And you will not get a second chance to find out. Raymond thanked him. He went back into the boardroom. The meeting concluded at 5:40. No termination announcement was made that evening. Those things required process and documentation and the involvement of legal counsel. But by the time the sun had fully set on Wednesday, Raymond Cho and the two board members who had been present had reached an alignment that was quiet and serious, and had the particular quality of a decision that arrives late, but arrives certain. The question of what to do about Daniel was easier. The question of what they were willing to become, what the company was willing to become, was harder. It was the question underneath the question, the one that Raymond sat with alone in his car in the parking garage before he drove home, because it was the one that actually mattered. You could bring Daniel back. You could apologize, compensate, promote, restore. But if all you did was bring Daniel back and put him in the same structure that had allowed Tuesday morning to happen, you hadn't fixed anything. You'd just given the next Adrian Whitmore a longer fuse. The real question was whether Hargrove Manufacturing was willing to be a place that deserved a man like Daniel Brooks. Whether it was willing to be the kind of place that understood at every level of its organization that the people on the floor were not a cost center. They were the center. Raymond drove home through the snow. He thought about what Carl had said. You don't see it when it's happening. You only see it when it stops. He thought about Ava Brooks, 9 years old, sitting in a school nurse's office with a medication reaction and elevated blood pressure waiting for her father. He thought about what kind of company tells a man he can't go to his daughter. He thought about what kind of company he wanted Hargrove to be. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he knew. He just had to figure out how to say it in a way that Daniel Brooks would believe. And Daniel Brooks, 17 miles away, was reading a state capitol's flashcard by lamplight, while his daughter recited Boise, Idaho for the 4th time, with the focused determination of someone who has decided that getting all 50 right is a matter of personal dignity. "Good," Daniel said. "Again," she said. He flipped the card. They kept going. Raymond Cho arrived at Daniel's house at 9:58 on Friday morning. He came alone, which Daniel had not expected. Men in Raymond's position usually traveled with someone, an assistant, a lawyer, a buffer of some kind. Raymond came in a dark blue sedan. He drove himself parked at the curb in front of the house and walked to the front door carrying nothing but his coat and whatever he'd decided to say. Daniel watched him come up the front walk from the window. He had been watching the street for 10 minutes, not because he was anxious exactly, but because he needed to see how the man arrived. You learned things from that. Whether someone came prepared to negotiate or prepared to listen was written in how they held themselves before they ever opened their mouth. Raymond Cho walked slowly and looked at the house and the yard and the quiet street, the way a man looks at things when he is genuinely taking them in rather than performing the act of looking. He was 71 years old, Daniel knew, and he moved like it deliberately without wasted motion, with the kind of physical economy that came from having learned a long time ago that not everything needed to be rushed. Daniel opened the door before Raymond knocked. They looked at each other for a moment. "Mr. Brooks." "Mr. Cho, come in." He had coffee ready. He had made it that morning with the same deliberateness he brought to everything, not to impress, but because offering someone coffee when they came to your home was a basic human courtesy that his mother had instilled in him young and that he had never seen a reason to abandon regardless of circumstances. They sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Ava had done her flashcards. The same table where Daniel had rebuilt his resume 2 nights ago. It was a solid table oak bought secondhand 8 years ago, showing its age in a way that was honest rather than shabby. Raymond wrapped both hands around the mug Daniel set in front of him. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up. "I'm going to skip the part where I ease into this," he said. "I don't think you're a man who appreciates easing into things, and I've already wasted enough of your time." "I appreciate that. What happened Tuesday morning was wrong. Not procedurally ambiguous, not a matter of management philosophy, not a difference of opinion about authority structures. Wrong. A man followed every protocol, explained a genuine family emergency, and was told to choose between his job and his child." Raymond paused. "That is not a choice any employee of any company I am responsible for should ever be forced to make." Daniel held his coffee. He said nothing. He was listening in the particular way he listened when something important was being said, and he wanted to make sure he was hearing all of it. "I also want to say something harder," Raymond continued. "And I want to say it first before anything else because it matters more than anything we discuss after it." He met Daniel's eyes. "We failed you before Tuesday. The performance review that rated you minimum expectations after 11 years of commendations. The promotions that went to men with a fraction of your tenure. The fact that your knowledge was carrying significant portions of this operation, and nobody in the position of authority had formally recognized or compensated that." He paused again. "Those things didn't happen in 2 days. They happened over 18 months, and the board was not paying the attention it should have been paying, and I'm not going to dress that up in corporate language. We were asleep. You deserved better, and we didn't give it to you." The kitchen was very quiet. Daniel looked at Raymond Cho for a long moment. He had prepared himself for various versions of this conversation. He had prepared for a settlement offer framed as an apology. He had prepared for a carefully worded admission of procedural error that stopped just short of genuine accountability. He had prepared for the kind of corporate sorry that meant we regret the outcome without quite meaning we were wrong. He had not fully prepared for this. "That's an honest thing to say," he said finally. "It's the truth. I don't have any use for saying it if it isn't." Daniel set his mug down. "What is it you're offering, Mr. Cho? Your position back. A promotion to floor operations manager, which is what your actual role has been in practice for the better part of 5 years, without the title or the compensation. A salary adjustment to reflect that role. I'll have the specific number to you in writing by Monday, but I want you to know it will be significant. Full benefits reinstated without gap." Raymond paused. "And something that isn't about money. Tell me, a seat at the table, A genuine one, not decorative. When decisions are made that affect the floor staffing, scheduling, production targets, management hires, I want your voice in the room. Not because it's good optics. Because this company has been making decisions without the perspective of the people who actually know how it runs, and it shows. Daniel was quiet. "And Adrian Whitmore?" he asked. Raymond looked at him steadily. "That conversation is ongoing, and I'm not able to give you details, but I can tell you that the board's review of his tenure is thorough, and that what happened Tuesday morning is not the only thing being examined." "I'm not asking for his head," Daniel said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't carry things like that." "I know. But I need to know that what happened to me won't happen to the next person who has to choose between a sick kid and a paycheck. That's exactly what I'm here to talk about." Daniel stood. He walked to the counter and refilled his coffee. Not because he needed more coffee, but because he needed to move to think on his feet, the way he always thought best. He stood at the counter with his back to Raymond for a moment, then turned. "I have a condition," he said. "Carl Hutchins told me you would." Something almost like a smile crossed Daniel's face. Almost. "Carl talks too much. Carl talks the exact right amount." Raymond leaned forward slightly. "Tell me your condition." Daniel looked at him. "It can't just be about me," he said. "I'm not going to walk back into that building because my situation got corrected and everyone else's stayed the same. Emergency family leave. Real emergency leave. Protected, no retaliation, no performance review, impact, no informal pressure to not use it. Documented. Enforced. With teeth." He paused. "And a process for employees to raise management concerns without fear. An actual process, not a suggestion box. Something with oversight that doesn't run through the person they're complaining about." Raymond nodded slowly. "The floor supervisors," Daniel continued. "The ones who left under Whitmore. I want you to look at whether they'd come back under different conditions. Not all of them will, but they should be asked." "Is there more?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Training. For managers. Not a seminar, not a one-day thing. Actual training with accountability built in on how to treat people like they matter. Because the thing that happened to me has been happening in smaller ways to other people for 18 months, and nobody stopped it because nobody felt like they could. That's a culture problem. You don't fix a culture problem with one apology." Raymond Cho sat back in his chair. He looked at Daniel Brooks, this 35-year-old man in his kitchen, in his ordinary house, who had been told to obey or leave, and had chosen dignity, and was now sitting across from the chairman of the board, laying out conditions not for himself, but for the people who would come after him. "You know," Raymond said quietly, "I've been in business for 45 years. I've sat across from a lot of people in a lot of negotiations. Most of them, when they have leverage, use it for themselves. That's not a criticism. It's human nature." Daniel looked at him without expression, waiting. "You're using it for everyone else." "They don't have leverage," Daniel said. "I do, so I use mine." Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, to all of it. I will need time to implement some of it properly, but yes, all of it. I want it in writing. You'll have it. Not a letter of intent. An actual policy document board approved." "By when do you need it?" "Weeks." Raymond nodded. He started to say something and then stopped. Started again. "Can I ask you something that isn't about any of this?" "Go ahead." "Your daughter. How is she?" The question landed differently than Raymond had perhaps expected it to. Not intrusively, there was nothing intrusive about it. It landed with the particular weight of a question that has been carried by the person asking it since the moment they understood what Tuesday morning had actually been about. "She's good," Daniel said. "She got 49 out of 50 state capitals last night. She's going for 50 tonight." Raymond smiled. It was the first time his face had done anything like that since he walked through the door. "Which one did she miss?" "Rhode Island." Daniel paused. "Providence. She keeps putting Hartford." "That's Connecticut." "She knows. She's furious about it." Raymond laughed, a real laugh, short and genuine, the kind that comes out before you've decided whether to let it. Then he stood, and Daniel stood, and they shook hands across the kitchen table. 2 weeks, Daniel said. 2 weeks, Raymond confirmed. He picked up his coat. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and turned back one more time. Mr. Brooks, for what it's worth, I watched the security footage from Tuesday morning. All of it. From the moment you got the phone call to the moment you walked out. He paused. The way you carried yourself. The way you left. He seemed to be choosing his words with care. I've been trying to think of another word for it. I keep landing on the same one. Daniel waited. Dignity, Raymond said. It was one of the most dignified things I've ever seen on a factory floor. He left. Daniel stood at the door and watched the dark blue sedan pull away from the curb. He stood there for a moment after it was gone, feeling the cold air from the open door, not quite ready to close it. Then he went back to his kitchen table and sat down. He felt something settling in his chest, slow and sure, like ballast. Not victory. Victory implied a contest, and Daniel had never thought of it that way. More like verification. Like the feeling when something you knew to be true is confirmed by someone else, and you realize you had been carrying the uncertainty of whether anyone else would ever see it, and now you could put that weight down. He thought about the floor, about Marcus and Carl and Pete Griggs and the women on line 4 who had looked at him that morning with those faces he would not forget. He thought about the 3 supervisors who had resigned. He thought about 14 complaints that should have changed things and hadn't until they added up to one man walking out a door. He thought about Marie. I thought about what she would say if she were sitting across from him right now in the chair where Raymond Cho had just been with her coffee, and her practical eyes and her ability to cut through to what actually mattered with a precision that had always slightly amazed him. She would say, "Now what are you going to do about it?" Not sarcastically. Genuinely. Because Marie had been constitutionally incapable of treating any situation as a destination rather than a starting point. He picked up his phone and called Carl. Carl answered on the second ring. "How'd it go?" "He came alone." "I know. I told him to." Daniel paused. "You told him." "I told him that if he showed up with a lawyer and a prepared statement, you'd hear him out politely and then close the door and never look back. I told him to come like a person, not like a corporation." A pause. "Was I wrong?" "No," Daniel said. "You weren't wrong." So I told him yes, conditionally." Carl exhaled. Long, slow, like a man who has been holding something in for several days. "What conditions?" Daniel told him. When he was done, Carl was quiet for a moment. Then, emergency family leave with teeth. Yes. Management accountability process that doesn't run through the manager. Yes. You know what those things are going to mean for people on that floor? Yes. That's why they're the conditions. Another silence. When Carl spoke again, his voice was different, rougher at the edges, the way voices get when something has moved through them that a person wasn't expecting to feel. "Daniel, for what it's worth. What you did Tuesday walking out like that, no anger, no scene, just done. I've been on floors for 20 years. I've seen a lot of things." He stopped. "I've never seen 200 people go that quiet for 3 minutes because of one man walking out a door." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "They needed to see that. Even the people who didn't know they needed it. They needed to see a man choose himself and his kid over a paycheck and not break." A pause. "You gave them something to think about what they'd do, about what they should be able to do." Daniel looked out the kitchen window. The snow from Wednesday was melting now, running off the edge of the roof in thin silver lines. "Carl, when I come back." "When, not if." "Good. When I come back, I'm going to need you exactly where you are. Don't let them move you. Don't let them promote you sideways into something that gets you off the floor. I'm 61 years old. They're not promoting me anywhere. Don't let them try." "Understood." A pause. "Daniel, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you when I called Tuesday." "Okay. I signed the termination paperwork. They marked it voluntary resignation." Carl's voice had gone flat and direct, the way voices go when they're carrying guilt that has been processed but not resolved. I signed it because I didn't have a better option in the moment. But I want you to know I knew it wasn't right when I did it. And I want you to know I'm sorry." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Carl, you also filed the incident report. You emailed Cho's assistant. You called me after. You came in 40 minutes early Wednesday morning and talked to Marcus." He paused. "Good people in bad situations make the best choices they can. You made yours. Doesn't always feel like enough." "No. But you did more than nothing. That's not nothing." Carl cleared his throat. "You sound like your father." "I'll take that." They talked for another few minutes. Logistics, mostly the practical shape of what came next. Then Daniel ended the call and sat in the quiet kitchen for a while. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize at first, and then recognized Marcus. "Mr. Brooks. I heard you might be coming back. I just wanted to say that statement I filed to HR. I meant every word. And I learned more from watching you walk out of that building than from anything I've been taught since I got there. Thought you should know." Daniel read it twice. He typed back, "Come find me when I'm back on the floor. You've got good instincts. Let's make sure they develop right." He put the phone down. He sat with the quiet for another moment, and then he did what he always did when the large things needed to be absorbed, and he needed to return to the world as it actually was. He got up and started making lunch. Ava came home at 3:15, dropped her backpack by the door with the force of a child who has been in school for 7 hours and needs the world to know it, and appeared in the kitchen doorway with the expression she wore when something had happened that she wanted to tell him, but was rationing out for maximum effect. "What?" he said. "Nothing." "Ava, I'm just standing here." "You're standing there with a face." She came to the counter and climbed onto her stool and folded her hands on the surface with elaborate casualness. "I got 100 on the geography quiz." He looked at her. "All the state capitals," she said. "Mr. Fogarty made it an extra credit question on the regular quiz, and I was the only one who got all 12. He only asked 12, but I know all 50. She paused for emphasis. "Including Providence, Rhode Island. You studied it this morning before school." "I wrote it on my hand." He looked at her palm. "Sure enough. Providence Rye. In the same purple marker, slightly smeared now from washing her hands at school, but legible." "Your mother," he said, shaking his head slowly. "I know." She grinned. "It works, though." He put a plate in front of her. She picked up her fork and then looked at him with those dark eyes, Marie's eyes always, and said, "Daddy, the man who came this morning, did things get worked out?" He looked at his daughter. "How do you know a man came this morning?" "Mrs. Patterson told me when I walked past her yard. She said a fancy car was parked in front of our house and a man in a nice coat went inside." She stabbed a piece of pasta. "She notices everything." "She does. So did they?" Daniel leaned against the counter. He looked at his daughter, 9 years old, 49 out of 50 on Wednesday. 50 out of 50 today. Purple marker on her palm. Her mother's eyes. His stubbornness, and an ability to ask the question that mattered, with a directness that he was going to have a serious conversation with God about one day, because it was going to make her teenage years very challenging. "Yeah," he said. "Things got worked out. Are you going back to work?" "In a couple weeks, yes." She nodded, chewed, thought about it. "Is it going to be better, or just the same?" He considered that with the seriousness it deserved, because she deserved a serious answer. Different, he said. "Not perfect. Different is all you can usually get." She considered that. "Different better, or different different?" "Different better. We're working on it." She seemed to accept this. She ate for a moment in silence and then looked up. "Did you tell them your conditions?" He stared at her. "How do you know I had conditions?" "Because you always have conditions, Daddy. You don't do anything without conditions. Mrs. Patterson says you're the most—" She scrunched her face, trying to remember the word, "principled man she's ever met." "Mrs. Patterson talks too much." "Mrs. Patterson talks the exact right amount." He looked at his daughter. She looked back at him with those dark eyes, completely straight-faced. And Daniel Brooks, 35 years old, 12-year veteran, the man who had walked out of a factory in silence and refused to break and laid out conditions for a board chairman at a kitchen table. That man sat down across from his 9-year-old daughter and laughed. Really laughed from somewhere low and real and long-held, the kind of laugh that doesn't happen unless something has loosened that was tight for too long. Ava watched him with a small, satisfied smile. "What?" he said when he could. "Nothing," she said. "You just needed that." She went back to her pasta. He wiped his eyes. He needed that. Over the next 2 weeks, the factory held its breath. Word got out the way. Word always gets out in places where people work closely together and share break rooms and parking lots and 12 years of accumulated knowledge about each other. The specific details moved in imprecise ways. Someone heard something from someone who'd heard something from Carl, but the shape of what was happening became clear enough. Daniel was coming back. Something was changing. On the production floor, this information moved through people differently, depending on who they were and what they'd seen and how long they'd been there. Marcus, who had been running line 2 with quiet ferocity since Tuesday, felt something physically loosen in his shoulders when he heard it, an unconscious bracing he hadn't known he was doing. Pete Griggs on line 3 told 2 people and then went back to work, but he smiled while he did it, which Pete Griggs almost never did. The women on line 4, 3 of them had been there longer than anyone, except Carl said nothing about it to each other for an entire day. And then on the second day, one of them said to the others, simply, "Good." And they all nodded, and that was the conversation. Linda Marsh in HR was drafting the policy documents that Daniel had requested. She had been drafting them with the particular energy of someone who had been waiting for permission to do the right thing, and was now working as fast as she could before anyone changed their mind. Emergency family leave policy, protected, documented, enforceable, with an explicit prohibition against using leave as a basis for negative performance review. Management accountability process, a reporting structure that went directly to the board's HR subcommittee, bypassing the direct management chain. Implementation timeline, aggressive. She sent the first draft to Raymond Cho on Monday of the second week. He sent it back with 2 small edits and a note that said, "This is good work, Linda. This is what we should have had 3 years ago." She filed it. It would go to the full board for formal approval on Friday. Adrian Whitmore had been placed on administrative leave, pending the completion of the board's 18-month review on Monday of the first week. He had gone quietly, or at least without the kind of public confrontation that makes things worse. His assistant had packed his office while he watched, and he had left the building with his box of personal items without stopping to speak to anyone on the floor. No one went to see him off. That fact settled into the building the same way Daniel's departure had, but with entirely different weight. Where Daniel's leaving had felt like a wound raw wrong, something that should not have happened. Adrian's was something else, something that felt to the people on the floor less like loss and more like the end of a long-held breath. Carl had called Daniel that evening. "Whitmore's gone." "I heard." "You feel anything about that?" Daniel thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "That's not really about me. Might be for some people. It's not for me. My situation isn't better because his is worse. My situation is better because of what changes." Carl was quiet for a moment. "You're a better man than most." "I don't know about that. I just know what I care about." "Same thing sometimes." Daniel let that sit. "Carl, how's Marcus doing?" "Good. Better than good, honestly. He's been running line 2 like he's been doing it for 5 years. Kid's got the instincts." "I know. I could see it the first week." "He asked about you, a couple times." "I know. He texted." "He's worried he overstepped with the witness statement, that maybe it made things complicated for him." "Tell him it did the opposite." "I'll tell him. He'll feel better." A pause. "Daniel, people on this floor are going to work differently when you come back. I want you to be ready for that." "Different how?" "Different like they're going to look to you, more than before. And before they already looked to you a lot." Carl paused. "What happened you walking out like that? It changed something. People who weren't sure they were allowed to have a line, a place they wouldn't cross. They saw you cross yours and not fall apart. It gave them something. Daniel was quiet, absorbing that. "I don't want to be anyone's symbol," he said. "I'm just a man. I know that. But sometimes being just a man completely without apology, that's the symbol people need." A pause. "You don't have to be anything other than what you are. That's sort of the whole point." Daniel sat with that for a long moment after they hung up. I didn't want it. The weight of meaning more than one person should mean to a workplace. The responsibility of representing something larger than yourself. He had never asked for any of it. He had just tried to do good work and be a good father and keep a promise he made at a grave on a cold February morning. But he understood what Carl was saying, and he understood sitting in his kitchen in the quiet, that understanding it and accepting it were two different things, and that he might have to find a way to do both. He picked up his phone and looked at Ava's contact photo, a newer one from last summer at the lake, squinting against the sun with a fish she'd caught held up proudly in both hands. He thought about what she'd said at the urgent care center in the small voice she used when she was being her most honest. "I need you to be okay," like pretty much always. He was going to be okay. He was going to be better than okay. And in 6 days, he was going to walk back into Hargrove Manufacturing, not as the man who had been told to obey or leave, but as the man who had answered that ultimatum in the only language that meant anything. With silence. With his daughter's photograph in his pocket. With his dignity entirely intact. The policy documents arrived in Daniel's email on Thursday morning, 2 days before the board's Friday vote. He read them at the kitchen table with his coffee slowly, the way he read anything that mattered, not skimming for the headline, but moving through each clause, each definition, each enforcement mechanism, looking for the places where good intentions went soft, where language that sounded solid revealed itself to be hollow when you pressed it. He read for 40 minutes. Then he called Raymond Cho. "The emergency leave language," he said. "Section 3 subsection B. It says management may not use approved leave as a basis for negative performance evaluation. But it doesn't address informal consequences. A supervisor who can't touch your review can still make your daily life difficult. Scheduling assignments, the small things that don't show up in a file but make a person feel like they're being punished." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "You're right. I need language that covers the culture, not just the paperwork." "How would you word it?" "I'd add any pattern of differential treatment, following approved leave scheduling changes, reassignment exclusion from advancement opportunities, constitutes retaliation and will be reviewed under the same process as formal complaints." Daniel paused. That gives people something to point to. Right now, they can file a complaint about what's written down. They need to be able to file one about what isn't. "I'll have Linda revise it today. Anything else?" Daniel looked at the document. "The management accountability process. The reporting goes to the board's HR subcommittee." "That's right. But the subcommittee needs a defined response timeline. Right now it says complaints will be reviewed. It doesn't say when." 30 days. 21. 30 is long enough for people to feel forgotten. 21 days, Raymond repeated. He was writing. Daniel could hear the pen moving. "Done. What else?" "That's it." Daniel closed the document on his laptop. "It's good work. Linda did good work. I'll tell her you said so. She'll appreciate it." A pause. "Daniel, the board votes tomorrow at 2. Barring something I don't anticipate, the policies will be formally approved by end of day. I'll send you the final version by 5 o'clock. And my start date. Whenever you're ready. Monday if you want. Next Monday if you need another week." Daniel thought about it. He thought about the factory floor, and Carl and Marcus, and the maintenance log on line 3, and the hydraulic press that had taken an hour and 20 minutes to fix because the man who knew it wasn't there. He thought about 14 complaints and 3 resigned supervisors and 200 people who had gone quiet for 3 minutes. "Monday," he said. "I'll have everything ready. Mr. Cho." Daniel paused. "One more thing. When I come back, I don't want a ceremony. No announcement, no assembly. Nothing that makes it a production. You just want to come in. I just want to come in, do my job. That's all this ever was." Raymond was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice carried that same quality it had carried at Daniel's kitchen table, something beyond professional courtesy, something that had been moved by what it had witnessed. "Understood," he said. "Monday morning. No ceremony." He paused. "For what it's worth, I don't think it's going to go exactly that way." Daniel found out what he meant at 5:47 on Monday morning. He pulled into the Hargrove parking lot in the dark, same as always. Thermos in the cup holder, Ava's new photograph in his jacket pocket. He had printed a fresh one over the weekend. The lake picture with the fish and the squinting smile, because the carousel photograph had lived in that locker for 4 years, and it was time for a new one. He parked in his usual spot, gathered his things, and walked toward the employee entrance. Ron Sellers was at his desk. He stood up when Daniel came through the door. Ron Sellers, 63 years old, retired postal worker man of approximately 4 words per morning, for 12 years, stood up from his desk and extended his hand and gripped Daniel's with both of his and said, "Welcome back, son. We missed you around here." Daniel looked at him. "Thank you, Ron. Your locker's been left exactly how you left it. Nobody touched it. I made sure." Daniel didn't have words for a moment. He just nodded, and Ron nodded back, and that was the conversation, and it was enough. He walked to the locker room. He changed into his work clothes' new Hargrove shirt, same boots, same navy pants. He opened his locker and looked at the shelf where his old badge and folded jacket were still sitting exactly as he had left them 2 weeks ago. Undisturbed. Like a small monument to a choice that everyone had apparently decided deserved to be preserved. He put the new photograph inside. He picked up his old badge and looked at it for a moment. Then he clipped it to his shirt and closed the locker. He walked out of the locker room and toward the production floor. He heard it before he got there. Not the machines. Those weren't running yet. First shift didn't start for another 12 minutes. What he heard was people. Voices, movement, the particular collective sound of a large group of human beings who are present and awake and waiting for something. He pushed through the door. 237 employees were standing on the production floor, not in a formal arrangement, not lined up, not organized. Just standing the way people stand when they have gathered because they decided to gather. Filling the floor from line 2 to line 4, from the northwest wall to the supervisor stations. And when Daniel walked through that door, every single one of them was looking at him. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Carl Hutchins, standing 20 feet away near his station, started clapping. And the rest of the floor followed. It wasn't the polished, coordinated applause of a ceremony. It was the real kind, uneven building, some people clapping hard and fast, some slower, some just nodding. Marcus on line 2 with his hands going and his jaw tight in the way young men's jaws get tight when they are feeling something they haven't named yet. The 3 women from line 4, all 3 of them applauding and not looking away. Pete Griggs with his arms folded and his hands clapping against his own forearms, because that was as expressive as Pete Griggs got, which for Pete was enormous. Daniel stood in the doorway and let it happen. He did not hold his hands up to stop it. He did not deflect or dismiss it. He had spent a long time learning that there was a particular grace required in allowing people to give you what they needed to give. That refusing it was its own kind of pride, and that these people had needed 2 weeks to hold something that now needed somewhere to go. He let it go there. It lasted maybe 90 seconds. Then it quieted the way those things quiet, not all at once, but in a natural settling like water finding its level. And Daniel walked to the center of the floor. He looked around at the faces he knew, the ones he'd trained, and the ones he'd worked beside, and the ones he'd covered for, and the ones who had covered for him, and the young ones like Marcus, who were still figuring out what kind of workers they were going to be. He said, "Let's go to work." That was all. And the machines started. The first hour of that Monday was the most productive single hour Hargrove Manufacturing had recorded in 18 months. Linda Marsh would note it later in a report that nobody asked her to write, but that she wrote anyway because she believed in documenting things. Output per line quality checks. Incident reports, every metric that mattered, moved in the right direction simultaneously in the first hour on the first day. She would not ascribe it to magic or sentiment. She would ascribe it to what it actually was, People who were good at their jobs, working in an environment where they felt for the first time in a long time that being good at their jobs was something that the people in charge actually noticed and valued. That was all. That was the whole thing. That was what 18 months of Adrian Whitmore had taken away, and what one man walking back through a door had begun to restore. Daniel spent the first part of the morning, the way he always spent the first part of the morning, walking his inspection of lines 2, 3, and 4, checking the machines, listening to their rhythms, noting what needed attention and what was running clean. He found 2 things that needed minor adjustment and fixed them before the supervisors even knew they existed. At 9 o'clock, he stopped by line 2. Marcus was running his station with the same focused intensity Carl had described on the phone. He saw Daniel coming and stood a little straighter, not nervously, but with the particular attention of someone who is aware that a person whose opinion matters to them is approaching. Marcus. Mr. Brooks. A pause. Should I still call you that? Daniel's fine. Daniel. He seemed to be figuring out how to say the next thing. I want to say the statement I sent to HR. You did the right thing. I wasn't sure if... You documented the truth. That's always the right thing. Daniel looked at him steadily. How's line 2 running? Marcus blinked at the transition. Then, good. I found a calibration issue on the secondary press last week. Fixed it myself using the maintenance log. The March entry. Yes, your notes were... they were really thorough. Write that way yourself, every time. The person reading your notes in 8 months might be the one who saves the company 3 hours of downtime. Marcus nodded, storing it. There's also something on the conveyor tension. Northeast corner. I've been watching it for 4 days. I don't think it's urgent yet, but it's moving in the wrong direction. Daniel looked toward the northeast corner. Show me. They walked to the conveyor together, and Marcus showed him what he'd been watching, explaining it with the specific vocabulary of someone who had been paying close attention and was now translating observation into language. Daniel listened without interrupting. He put his hand on the conveyor housing and felt it for a moment, the way you feel a pulse. You're right, he said. Not urgent. This week, not today. Log it this morning and flag it for the maintenance schedule for Wednesday. I already logged it. Daniel looked at him. 4 days ago, Marcus said, when I first noticed it. Daniel said nothing for a moment. He just nodded, the kind of nod that carries more than acknowledgement. You've got good instincts, he said. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Marcus held that for a second. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. When you walked out 2 weeks ago, did you know what was going to happen? Did you know it was going to... He searched for the word matter that much. Daniel thought about the question seriously, because it deserved to be taken seriously. No, he said. I didn't walk out to make a point. I walked out because my daughter needed me. The rest of it... He paused. The rest of it happened because of the people on this floor, not because of me. Marcus thought about that. But you gave them something to respond to, he said. You gave us something to respond to. Daniel looked at this 23-year-old man who had sent an unsolicited witness statement to HR on his first month on the job because it was the right thing to do, and he felt something that he recognized as hope, which was not something he had felt about the future of this factory in quite a while. Do good work, Daniel said. Show up for the people around you. That's how you give people something to respond to, not once, every day. He held the young man's gaze. Every day, Marcus. That's the whole job. Marcus nodded. Daniel moved on. By noon the floor had found its rhythm. The deep settled rhythm of a place that is running the way it was designed to run, every part, doing what it was supposed to do, every person in their right place. Daniel felt it the way he always felt it, in the quality of the noise and the movement and the air of the place, and he felt something else underneath it that he recognized as right. Not fixed. Fixing took time, and there were still hard conversations ahead, and adjustments to make, and the slow work of rebuilding what 18 months had eroded. But right, moving in the right direction for the right reasons. He ate lunch in the break room. He sat at the same table he'd sat at for 12 years, with the same view of the same vending machine and the same clock on the wall, and Carl sat across from him, and they ate in the comfortable silence of men who have known each other long enough that silence between them is not empty. After a while, Carl said, "How does it feel?" Daniel thought about it. "Like work," he said. "Which is exactly what it should feel like." Carl smiled. "Yeah." He ate for a moment. Linda's got the revised policies posted on every bulletin board in the building, sent to every employee email this morning. I saw. People are reading them, actually reading them, not just glancing. A pause. That matters. It matters if the follow-through matches the paper, Daniel said. The paper is the easy part. The follow-through is your job now. That's the whole point of the title change. Daniel looked at him. Floor Operations Manager. The title that had been the reality for 5 years and the paperwork for 2 weeks. I know. You okay with that? The responsibility of it? I was already doing the work, Daniel said. Now I have the authority to back it up. That's not more responsibility. That's just honesty about what was already there. Carl nodded slowly. Gerald Hargrove would have liked this, he said. What's happening today? He would have liked seeing it. Daniel thought about the old man who had built this company in a garage in 1987 and spent 30 years learning the name of every person on the floor. Yeah, he said. He would have. He made mistakes too, you know. Gerald. Nobody's hands were clean. Carl looked at his food. But he knew what a factory was at its core. He knew it was people. Whatever else it was people first. That's what it always comes back to, Daniel said. Always. They finished lunch. The afternoon shift ran cleaner than the morning. At 3:15, Daniel's phone vibrated in his pocket. He checked it quickly. Got 50 out of 50 on the geography test today. Mr. Fogarty gave me extra credit and told the whole class. Ava. He stood at his station on the floor and read it twice. Then he typed back, "That's my girl. I'll have dinner ready at 6. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Can we have the soup? Yes. With the bread. Yes, Ava. Okay, good. Love you, Daddy. He put the phone back in his pocket. He stood for a moment in the middle of the factory floor, surrounded by the noise and the rhythm and the 237 people doing their work, and he felt the full weight of the day, all of it from 5:47 in the morning, when Ron Sellers stood up from his desk, to the applause he had let himself receive to Marcus, and the conveyor log, to lunch with Carl, and the policies on the bulletin boards, and the afternoon shift running clean. He felt all of it, and underneath all of it, steady and permanent as the floor beneath his boots, he felt the same thing he had felt sitting beside Ava's bed in the urgent care center 2 weeks ago, holding her hand while she slept. Certainty that he had made the right choice. Not just 2 weeks ago the choice to leave, but every choice that had brought him to this floor, this job, this life. The choice to stay loyal when loyalty was hard. The choice to train Marcus. The choice to fix the hydraulic press on a Saturday in March and write thorough notes in a log that someone might need someday. The choice to keep Ava's photograph in his locker because a man should always know why he is where he is. And the choice, the one that everything had hinged on, the one that Adrian Whitmore had forced into the open like a surgeon's blade, to be without apology and without negotiation exactly who he was. A father first. Everything else after. He went back to work. At 5:30, he did his end-of-shift walk through, the same one he had done for 12 years, checking the machines, reviewing the logs, making notes for the night crew. He found one small issue on line 3 and resolved it in 7 minutes. He reviewed Marcus's log entry from the morning and added a note confirming the observation and the Wednesday timeline. He signed off on the day. He changed out of his work clothes. He opened his locker one more time before he left. The new photograph was there. Ava at the lake, squinting against the sun, holding the fish in both hands like a trophy, grinning in a way that was all her own. Not the carousel grin, not the gap-toothed smile that was slowly giving way to her permanent teeth, but something newer, fuller, more itself. A 9-year-old who was becoming. He looked at it for a moment. He closed the locker. He walked past Ron Sellers' desk on the way out. Ron was eating his dinner, a different sandwich, same routine. Good first day back, Ron asked without looking up. Good first day back, Daniel said. Tomorrow's easier. Always is. He pushed through the door. The cold air hit him the same way it had hit him 2 weeks ago. The same door, the same parking lot, the same Ohio November, refusing to commit to winter but leaning toward it. But everything else was different. He got in his truck. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. He thought about Marie. He thought about the Tuesday afternoon 4 years ago that had split his life in two, and the 4 years since carrying everything she would have carried and doing it as best he could, which was never perfectly, but was always honestly, and always with love. He thought about what she would say right now, sitting beside him in the dark truck in the factory parking lot, if she could. I thought she would say, "You did good, Daniel." And then she would say, "Now go home and make Ava's soup." He started the truck. He drove home through the early dark, through streets beginning to show the first tentative lights of the season, past the Ridgewood Elementary sign that still had last week's announcements on it that nobody had changed yet, past Mrs. Patterson's house where the porch light was already on. He pulled into his driveway. He sat for one more moment. Then he went inside to make his daughter's soup. The soup was tomato from scratch, the way Marie had taught him in the first year of their marriage, in a kitchen half the size of this one, standing behind him with her chin on his shoulder, telling him he was doing it wrong, and then laughing when he told her to show him then. I made it the same way every time. Same pot, same sequence, same amount of time on the low heat that she had insisted was the only right way to do it. Ava had never known any other version, which meant she believed it was simply how tomato soup was supposed to taste, which Daniel considered one of the quieter victories of his life as a father, that he had preserved something of her mother's, without Ava ever knowing it was preservation. She came into the kitchen at 5:58, still in her school clothes backpack, dropped in its spot by the door, and climbed onto her stool, with the energy of a person who has had a genuinely good day and is ready to tell someone about it. "I told you 50 out of 50, she said. "You did. You didn't fully believe me. I absolutely believed you. You said it was ambitious." "Ambitious things happen," Daniel said, stirring. "That's not doubt. That's vocabulary." She considered this with the expression she wore when she wasn't sure if he'd won the point, or she had. "Mr. Fogarty said I was the most prepared student he'd had in 5 years. Mr. Fogarty is correct. He said I should consider geography club." "What did you say?" "I said I'd think about it." She pulled the breadbasket toward her and broke off a piece without asking which she knew was acceptable, and he knew she knew, and the whole thing was a ritual neither of them bothered to name. "How was your first day back?" He ladled the soup into her bowl. He sat down across from her. He looked at his daughter, this 9-year-old person, who had been his entire reason for everything for 4 years, and who was becoming with a speed that he could watch happening if he paid attention, something more than a child he was protecting, someone he was raising. "Good," he said. "Really good." "Did people treat you differently?" "Some." "Better or weird?" "Both a little. Mostly better." She dipped her bread into the soup, the way she always did, which was technically incorrect, and also completely right. "Were they mad that you left?" "No, they were glad I came back." "That's different from being mad you left." It is, he said. "You're right about that." She ate for a moment. "Daddy, when that man told you to obey him or leave," she said it the way she said things she had been carrying for a while carefully, like she'd been turning the words over and was finally ready to put them down. "Were you scared?" Daniel looked at her. She looked back at him with Marie's eyes, patient and direct. "No," he said honestly. "I wasn't scared." "What were you?" I thought about it. He thought about standing on that factory floor with 200 people watching, and Adrian Whitmore's voice still in the air, and the phone call from the school nurse sitting in his chest like a stone, and he tried to find the accurate word for what he had felt in that moment. "Clear," he said. "I was clear." "What does that mean?" "Clear. It means sometimes things get complicated. Life gets complicated, what you want, what you need, what other people need from you, what you owe, and what you don't. It's a lot of noise all the time." He paused. And then sometimes something happens that makes all the noise stop, and you can see exactly one thing, exactly what matters most, and everything else just falls away. He looked at her. That's what clear feels like. Ava thought about that with the seriousness she brought to things that seemed important to her. And I was the thing, she said. Not a question, just confirming. You were the thing, he said. You are always the thing. She nodded once, slowly, and went back to her soup with an expression he recognized. It was the expression she wore when something had settled inside her, when a question she'd been carrying had found its answer and could be put down. They ate together in the warm kitchen, and outside the Ohio dark had fully arrived, and the season was finally committing to winter, the way it had been threatening to for weeks. And neither of them talked for a while, because the quiet between them had always been comfortable, had always been one of the things Daniel was most grateful for, that his daughter was a person he could be silent with. After a while she said, "Providence, Rhode Island." He looked up. "I'm just saying it," she said, "so I don't forget again." "Providence, Rhode Island," he confirmed. "Never Hartford. Never Hartford. Hartford is Connecticut." "I know." She pointed at him with her spoon. "I know now." He smiled. She smiled back. And that was Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the morning that had changed everything, and the Brooks household was exactly what it had always been: a father and a daughter, and a pot of tomato soup, and a kitchen table, and the ongoing project of a life being built carefully, one right choice at a time. The months that followed were not simple. That needed to be said plainly, because the truth of what Daniel Brooks returned to was not a factory magically transformed overnight by one man's integrity. It was a factory in the middle of a real and difficult process of becoming something better than it had been, which meant it was also still in some ways what it had been. There were managers who resented the new policies. Not loudly, nobody was going to stand up and argue against emergency family leave in a room that knew what had happened to Daniel. But quietly, in the way that institutional resistance always operates: slow compliance, minimal effort, the art of technically following a rule while draining it of meaning. Daniel knew this pattern. He had watched it his whole working life. He was not surprised by it, and he was not discouraged by it, because discouragement required surprise, and Daniel had long since stopped being surprised by the ways that organizations resisted becoming better. What he did instead was the same thing he had always done. He showed up. He worked. He paid attention. When a supervisor named Gary Tellez gave a worker named Donna Chen a Tuesday morning shift change 2 weeks after Donna had used approved family leave to take her mother to a cardiac appointment, Daniel noticed. He didn't make a scene. He walked to Gary's station at the end of the shift and stood beside him and said quietly and without performance, "The shift change for Donna Chen. Walk me through the operational reason." Gary blinked. "Staffing adjustment. The staffing numbers for Tuesday morning haven't changed. Walk me through it." A pause. It was a routine rotation. It wasn't. The rotation schedule is posted, and Donna wasn't on it. Daniel kept his voice even and level, and entirely without anger, which was somehow more effective than anger would have been. "This is the conversation where I tell you that I noticed, and you understand that I will always notice, and we don't have a second conversation about this particular kind of thing." "Agreed." Gary Tellez looked at him for a long moment. "Agreed," he said. The shift change was reversed the next morning. Donna Chen never knew exactly what had happened. She just knew that the thing that seemed wrong had been corrected, and she filed it under the category of things at Hargrove Manufacturing that had quietly started working the way they were supposed to. That category grew steadily over the following months. Linda Marsh began tracking it, not because anyone asked her to, but because she was a person who believed in data, and the data was telling a story she wanted to have on record. Formal complaints down 40% by month 3. Employee retention up. Productivity consistently at or above target. Sick day usage within normal range, which might not seem significant until you understood that under Adrian Whitmore's tenure, sick day usage had dropped to almost nothing because people had been afraid to use days they were entitled to. People using the days they were entitled to meant people who trusted that using those days was safe. Trust was not a metric that showed up on a quarterly report. But Linda could see it in every number she tracked. She put together a summary in month 4 and sent it to Raymond Cho with a subject line that said simply, "The numbers if you want them." He replied within 20 minutes, "I want them. Thank you, Linda." He forwarded the summary to the full board with a note of his own that said, "This is what it looks like when a company remembers what it's for." Raymond Cho was not a sentimental man. He was precise and practical, and had spent 45 years making decisions based on evidence rather than feeling. But he had been changed by this change in the specific way that powerful people are changed when they are forced to confront the gap between the organization they believed they were running and the organization that actually existed. He did not talk about it often. He didn't need to. What he did was pay different attention than he had before. He came to the factory more. He walked the floor. He learned the names of people he should have known years earlier. He stopped by Daniel's station one Thursday afternoon in February, 3 months after Daniel's return. "How are things?" he asked. "Good. Getting better. Anything you need that you don't have?" Daniel thought about it. The night shift supervisor situation. Griggs has been covering both night and day coordination since Whitmore's last reorganization. It's too much for one person, and it's been too much for 6 months. He hasn't complained, which is why nobody's addressed it. But it's going to show up eventually in an error, or in Pete burning out, and Pete is too good to lose. Raymond was already making a note. "I'll have HR look at the staffing structure this week. There's a woman on line 2 night shift named Carla Reeves, 7 years, exceptional. She's been doing informal coordination already without the title or the pay. She'd be the right person for a formalized role. Has she expressed interest?" "She doesn't know it's a possibility. Nobody's asked her." Raymond looked at him. "Will you ask her?" "I will, if you tell me there's actually something to offer when I do." "There will be something to offer," Raymond said. "By end of week. Then I'll ask her." Raymond put his notebook away. He looked at the floor, the running machines, the workers moving with their particular efficiency, the whole living system of it. He stood beside Daniel, and they both just looked at it for a moment. Two men who understood this place in different ways and from different distances, but who were in this moment seeing the same thing. "Gerald Hargrove called me last month," Raymond said. "He'd heard what happened, the whole story." Daniel waited. "He said to tell you something." Raymond paused. "He said that's what I built this place to be. That's what I always wanted it to be. Tell Brooks I'm glad someone remembered." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Tell him thank you," he said. "I already did." Raymond left. Daniel went back to work. The conversation with Carla Reeves happened on a Friday morning in the break room before her shift ended and his began. She was 44 years old and had 7 years on line 2 night shift and had absolutely no idea why the floor operations manager was waiting to talk to her at 5:30 in the morning with 2 cups of coffee. She sat down across from him with the careful expression of a person running through their recent work history, trying to identify what they'd done wrong. "Relax," Daniel said. "You're not in trouble." "Okay." She didn't fully relax. "Then what's this about?" "I've been watching how you work." "That sounds like the beginning of trouble. For 6 months you've been coordinating the secondary scheduling on night shift when the gaps appear, covering the communication between line 2 and line 3 when the night supervisor is managing a floor issue, keeping track of the calibration logs across 3 stations instead of 1. He looked at her steadily. "Who asked you to do that?" She blinked. "Nobody." "Right. You just did it because it needed doing." "If I didn't do it, things fell through." "I know. That's why I'm here." He pushed one of the coffees toward her. "How would you feel about doing it with a title and a salary that actually reflects what you've been doing?" Carla Reeves looked at him. She looked at the coffee. She looked at him again. "Is this real?" she said. "It's real. HR has a formal posting this afternoon. Night shift operations coordinator. It'll go to you first, which means you'll have it if you want it." She was quiet for a moment. He could see her processing it, the particular processing of someone who has been undervalued long enough that being accurately valued takes a moment to believe. "Why now?" she asked. Why not 6 months ago when I was already doing the work? Because 6 months ago nobody was paying the right kind of attention. He paused. I'm paying it now. That's what I can offer you, the promise that the right kind of attention is being paid. Not perfection, attention. She thought about it for about 4 seconds. Yes, she said. I want it. Good. Do I need to interview? It's a formality. You've been interviewing for 7 years. She laughed, surprised out of it, genuine. Okay, she said. Okay. She picked up her coffee. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. What you did, walking out like that. I heard about it, everybody heard about it. I wasn't on shift that morning, but I heard everything. She looked at him. I've been here 7 years. I've had moments where I thought about doing something like that. Drawing a line. And I never did. She paused. How did you know you could? Daniel thought about the question, really thought about it, because she deserved the real answer, not the tidy one. I didn't know, he said. I didn't walk out because I was certain it would work out. I walked out because I had already decided that some things mattered more than the outcome. He paused. My daughter needed me. That was the whole thing. What came after that wasn't part of the calculation. There was no calculation. But it worked out. This time, it doesn't always. She absorbed that. So how do you? You have to decide what you're worth before anyone else tells you, he said. Not arrogantly, just honestly. You have to know what you're not willing to give up and be clear about it to yourself even when nobody else is watching. He looked at her. Once you know that the hard moments get simpler, not easier, simpler. Carla Reeves looked at him for a long moment. You should teach that, she said. Whatever you just said, you should teach that. He shook his head. People already know it. They just need to see someone else remember it first. She took her coffee and left for the end of her shift. Daniel sat in the break room for a moment after she was gone. I thought about what she'd said. You should teach that. He thought about Marcus and the conveyor log. He thought about Carl and 20 years on factory floors. He thought about the 14 complaints that had never quite reached the people who could have acted on them, and the 3 supervisors who had left because nobody asked them to stay, and Donna Chen's shift change that got reversed because someone was paying the right kind of attention. I thought about what it meant to be a person who other people looked at when they needed to believe something was possible. He had told Marcus I didn't walk out to make a point. And that was true. He hadn't. He had walked out because Ava needed him, and everything else that followed was the consequence of 200 people watching one man refuse to be smaller than he was, and deciding in the privacy of their own hearts what that meant for them. That was the real thing. Not the drama of the moment, not the ultimatum, or the silence, or the badge placed on the shelf. The real thing was what happened after in the months of ordinary work in the Gary Telly's conversation, and the Carla Reeves conversation, and the maintenance logs, and the production numbers, and Linda Marsh's spreadsheets, and Raymond Cho walking the floor on Thursday afternoons. The real thing was the accumulation of small right choices made by people who had seen one large right choice and had been reminded that such choices were available to them. That was the thing that couldn't be managed away or reorganized out of existence or replaced by a more efficient process. That was what dignity looked like when it spread. In April, 5 months after Daniel's return, Hargrove Manufacturing held its annual employee recognition event. It was a modest affair. A catered dinner in the company's main conference room awards for tenure and performance and safety records remarks from Raymond Cho. The kind of thing that companies do every year and that employees attend with a mixture of genuine appreciation and mild obligation. Raymond spoke for about 15 minutes. He talked about the year that had passed. He talked about what the company was working to become, and about the distance between what it had been and where it was going, and about what that journey required from everyone in the room. He talked about accountability and trust, and the difference between a workplace that runs on fear and one that runs on genuine investment. And then he said Daniel's name. Most of you know this story, he said, looking out at the room full of people who absolutely knew this story. And I'm not going to retell it because it doesn't need my version. What I want to say is something different. He paused. Every company talks about its values. They put them on the wall. They print them in the handbook. But values aren't real until someone acts on them when it costs something. Until someone chooses what's right when what's easy is also available. He looked at Daniel. This man showed every one of us what it looks like to actually live a value. Not perform it. Live it. And what came from that, what's still coming from it, is the truest picture of what this company can be. There was applause. Daniel, sitting at a table with Carl and Marcus and Pete Griggs and Carla Reeves, received it the same way he had received the applause on his first morning back, fully without deflecting, because refusing it would have been its own kind of dishonesty. After the event, walking to his car in the April night, Carl fell into step beside him. They walked in silence for a moment. "Gerald Hargrove sent a card," Carl said. "Did you see it? It was on the table at the back. I saw it. He wrote something inside. Did you read it?" "I did." Carl waited. Daniel looked out at the parking lot at the building he had given 12 years and walked away from and walked back into. At the light still on in the windows of the night shift, running clean and steady. "He wrote the best thing a man can leave behind is proof that it was possible," Daniel said. "He meant the company, what we're building." Carl was quiet for a moment. "He meant you too." Daniel didn't argue with that. They reached Carl's truck. Carl stopped and turned and looked at him, the way men look at each other when something has happened between them that neither of them will talk about directly, but that both of them know is real. "You did something here, Daniel. Something that's going to outlast both of us." "We did something," Daniel said. "You filed the report. Linda drafted the policies. Marcus wrote the witness statement at 23 years old on his first month on the job. Raymond Cho drove to my house alone." He paused. "I just walked out a door." "You walked out a door the right way." "Yeah. That matters." "I know." Carl shook his hand, held it for a moment, let it go, got in his truck. Daniel drove home. Ava was still awake when he got there, which she was technically not supposed to be at 9:15 on a school night, but which he did not address with any real severity, because she was sitting at the kitchen table with a library book and a glass of water, and the focused, slightly guilty expression of a child who has decided that what she is doing is worth the consequence. "You should be asleep," he said, hanging up his coat. "I know, I wanted to wait up." "For what?" She closed the book, marking her page carefully. "To ask how it went." He sat down across from her. "It went well." "Did they say nice things about you?" "Raymond said some." "What did he say?" Daniel thought about how to translate 45 years of business experience and one company's difficult reckoning with itself into language appropriate for a 9-year-old on a school night. He said that values aren't real until someone acts on them when it costs something, he said. And that what happened, what I did, showed people what it looks like to actually live by what you believe. Ava considered that with her chin in her hand. "That's what you always tell me," she said. He looked at her. "What do I always tell you?" "That it's easy to say what you believe. The hard part is doing it when it's expensive." She tilted her head. "You use the word expensive, but you don't mean money." He looked at his daughter, this 9-year-old who had been listening to him more carefully than he knew, who had been filing things away in that precise and patient mind of hers, who would one day be a person in the world, carrying everything he had tried to give her, without quite knowing what form it would take when she got there. "No," he said. "I don't mean money." "I know." She stood and picked up her book and her water glass. "I'm going to bed now." "Good." She stopped in the doorway and turned back. "Daddy?" "Yeah. I'm glad you walked out." She said it with the directness she always used for the things that mattered most. "I know you lost your job for a little while, and that was scary. But I'm glad you came to me. And I'm glad you didn't let that man make you feel like you had to choose." Daniel looked at his daughter. "I didn't let him make me feel anything," he said. "I already knew what I was choosing." She nodded, satisfied. "Good night." "Good night, Ava." She went down the hallway. He listened to her bedroom door close. He sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the house, and he thought about the whole of it, from the phone call in his pocket on the production floor, to the school nurse's voice, to 4 words delivered on a factory floor, to a November door, and cold air, and a parking lot, and a dark drive, and a kitchen, and soup, and flashcards, and 49 out of 50, and then 50 out of 50, and a chairman at his door, and conditions and policies, and a return and applause, and 7 months of ordinary daily work, and a girl who had been paying attention the whole time. I thought about Marie. He thought about the promise at the grave. She will never face the worst of life alone. Whatever happens, her father will come. He had come. He would always come. And the daughter, who was now 9 years old and asleep down the hall, who wrote answers on her palm in purple marker and asked hard questions in doorways and listened more carefully than anyone knew, that daughter was going to carry something into her life that no job or salary or title could ever give her and no ultimatum could ever take away. She was going to carry the knowledge bone deep and permanent that her father was a man who knew what he was worth and knew what she was worth, and that when the world asked him to choose, he had chosen without hesitation and without apology and without ever looking back. That was the inheritance. Not money, not a title, not a company reformed by good policy and the slow work of people trying to do better. The knowledge that a man could be asked to make himself small and could simply choose not to. That was what Daniel Brooks left in the world, and it was more than enough. Some people spend their whole lives searching for the moment that proves what they're made of. Daniel Brooks didn't search for his. It came to him on an ordinary Tuesday morning in November, dressed as an ultimatum from a man in a red tie, and Daniel answered it the only way he knew how, by being completely and without compromise exactly who he was. A worker who showed up. A colleague who carried others when they needed carrying. A man who wrote thorough notes in maintenance logs because someone might need them someday. And a father above all else, before all else, after all else, a father who came when his daughter needed him. The rest of it, the board, the policies, the return, the 7 months of quiet transformation, the applause, the recognition, the girl doing her homework at the kitchen table with the answer written on her palm, all of it flowed from that one simple, costly, irreversible choice. He had chosen his daughter, and in doing so, he had chosen himself, and everything that mattered had followed.